Ladies and gentlemen, let's think about connecting the dots. Thinking means connecting things, connecting people, things, and ideas. And in creative thinking, it's quite often connecting people, things, and ideas that at first glance, or even second or third glance, you hadn't noticed or considered. You can look at something 1,000 times before you finally see that this is important, and yet it's been there all along. You just didn't know where or why to look. So let's look around. Let's look deeper into the shadows. Let's seek out the surprises. Let's go find some more dots and fill the web inside our minds. If we're going to talk about creativity and connecting the dots, we've first got to connect with Steve Jobs. He said at a commencement speech at Stanford that creativity is just about connecting the dots. A lot of people don't have very diverse experiences, so they don't have enough dots to connect. He also said in that speech that you cannot connect the dots looking forward. You can only connect them looking backward. You'll have to trust the dots will somehow connect in the future. And what I think he meant by that is, as you collect all these dots in your life, you're not going to know which ones are important. But what is important is that you do use your curiosity to explore, to look outside the normal expected realm. When he was at Reed College, he dropped out, but then he dropped into a class on typography. And because of that, years later, when he was designing the Macintosh, or rather, when they were designing the Macintosh, the typography ideas came back into the conversation. And it changed the way we look and even how we use computers. He didn't know about that back then. And I think he would suggest that you might just want to trust your sense of curiosity and how it looks ahead, even if you are not. Chapter 1, Collecting and Connecting the Dots. This empty web is a model. It's a metaphor for your brain when you were an infant. It's basically a box full of cobwebs. Cobwebs, like your brain, are designed to catch things. How many of you have ever been the parent of a 3 to 5-year-old? Raise your hand. Okay, thank you. Here's another question. How many of you were, once upon a time, between the ages of 3 and 5? I'm hoping that caught everybody in the audience. Well, according to Ian Leslie, author of the book Curious, he said the average 3 to 5-year-old asks 40,000 questions. That comes out to 36.5 questions per day. Susan Engel, author of The Intellectual Lives of Children, cited studies suggesting upwards of 90 questions a day. And on Apple TV right now, there's a new show called Becoming You, exploring child brain development between ages of 3 and 5. And they say on a good day or a bad day, depending upon if you're asking or answering, children's questions can hit gusts of 90 per hour. This is called diversive curiosity. Brains don't come with instruction manuals on anything, except to ask questions. Brains are hardwired for curiosity. So they ask questions, lots and lots of questions about everything. Children are trying to discover the cause of things. They're looking for patterns that reduce uncertainty. Diversive curiosity is all about connecting their collected dots and making the world, their world, more predictable. And small connections begin to emerge. Some are logical and enduring. Some are imaginative and absurd and might just become family stories that get told and told again about you or your siblings. The task of becoming a competent human being upon scientific, probably not parental examination, is quite fascinating because it is such a huge achievement. Other infant animals can be up and running in a matter of minutes. Edward Slingerland, author of the book Drunk, I'll talk about that book a little bit later, said our offspring, in comparison, are completely useless. The process by which they learn, again, with no instruction manual, is, well, in his words, young humans are spacey. And he describes his own experience of waiting at the door for a 4-year-old. They get halfway through tying their shoes and then forget what it is they're supposed to be doing. focusing instead on working a booger out of their nose or untying the other shoe they'd already managed to get on. You look away for a moment to check the time and then glance back to see that not only are the shoes not on, but for no conceivable reason they've decided, ta-da, to take their pants off. His description of the pathway of shifting curiosity is incredibly frustrating until you stop to think about the immensity of the task to become a competent adult. Diversive curiosity is a task that should leave us, in retrospect and with a lot of patience, a bit in awe. Yes, other infant animals can be up and running within minutes, because if they don't, they become somebody's dinner. But just by the age of 3, there's not another animal that comes even close to doing what a human child can do. In the Apple TV program Becoming You, they said the average child falls down 10,000 times before learning to walk. Other than when you, perhaps, were learning to walk, when was the last time that you tried and failed 10,000 times and kept going to achieve your goal? Diversive curiosity is how we learn about the world. It's filling up the web with lots and lots and lots of dots. Epistemic curiosity is how you develop competence in that world. You follow pathways of similar dots that have been connected through the millennia and find yourself drawn into a particular occupation, say architecture or medicine. This requires focus. You drill down into personal and occupational expertise. Epistemic curiosity also paradoxically requires a measure of ignorance. In order to focus, you have to ignore an awful lot of things. We have to put aside a lot of our diversive curiosity. It's almost as if we are putting aside playthings. It may seem a bit boring from the outside, but there are few better feelings than becoming competent at something you love. And the byproduct of such focus, if you're lucky and you're good, is mastery. It's how you become a professional. A timely question for the perhaps post-pandemic, economically uncertain year of 2022 is, what else is going to need your curiosity? Diversive curiosity is often frowned at in adults because it doesn't get the job done. But it is, however, necessary when the world dramatically changes and your diversive curiosity can be renewed to help you figure out what the real world or the real job is right here and now. A good way to think about that is when it comes to the future, we are all still essentially children, and diversive curiosity is a natural part of that. With any sort of curiosity, there's an admission of ignorance. Many people take delight in that. It's one of the reasons we love mysteries, because each time by the end of the story, we find out we've been fooled. And it's rather fun to be fooled once in a while. The shock of learning the truth exposes our ignorance, which cleverly gets knocked down by the surprise. Professionals with licenses don't tend to delight in ignorance. We have to show competence. But no matter who you are, there's resistance to the constancy of learning. We all want to coast at some point along the road of maturity. And the temptations of becoming mature in industry is always present in mature industries. Part of this is a reasonable and rational resistance against the fleeting fads that are sold as the latest trends. Beware of the profit motive behind the profit motive. Just because someone says you have to change because this is an inevitable future, you need to ask, if we do what they say, if we go along with their predictions, do they get rich? Do they gain power? You have to use your diversive curiosity to look a bit beneath the surface to discern their real motivations and dig deep enough to get past your own confirmation bias that too easily dismisses evidence that simply makes you uncomfortable. So, how comfortable are you with 2x4s? Just take a look at one of the dots I labeled on the web. How curious are you, really, about 2x4s? Or do you already know enough? Billy Faircloth, FAIA, of Kieran Timberlake, got curious about that basic building material when she was asking the larger question, why do we build the way we do? It's a question especially for mature industries, such as architecture is so often tempted to be. Billy even has a TEDx Philly video that explores what we don't know about 2x4s. She starts with the not too well-kept secret that 2x4s are in fact not 2x4. But by the end, she's talking about the molecular structure of wood. By seeing wood from a different and deeper perspective, it's no longer just a traditional material. It can be seen as an emerging material. And architecture can, with that, be seen as an emerging profession because it is now curiously connected to a changed way of thinking about an old material. And that's just one example of pursuing diversive curiosity to rethink the results of your epistemic curiosity. Zena Hitz, author of the rather delightful book called Lost in Thought, said the purpose of curiosity is to find what has yet to be connected. If you haven't done improv training, you should. One of the best tools they teach you is yes and. No matter what is tossed at you, you take it and say yes, and then you quickly connect it to something familiar to tell a story. So for example, looking at the slide, spiders. Say yes, and how do you connect that to architecture? Well, spider thread is stronger than steel. Steel is used in architecture. So how can we use spiders or the concept of spiders to rethink our buildings? ERs, they're unpredictable. They involve fast problem solving. They're oddly filled with humor because of so much tension that these doctors and nurses go through. Sound familiar? Like maybe one of your staff meetings or being on the job site? Dancing. It's collaborative. It's paradoxical. It has elegance. Do we think about our buildings when we think about things like collaboration, paradoxical, or elegance? The point is, as Zena Hitz says, is what's not yet connected. Through the yes and process, it's combining diversive curiosity with epistemic curiosity to identify unexpected but eventually logical and productive connections. What else can get you to say yes and? By removing expected boundaries. Look at the slide. Architecture and medicine, those words as occupations, because of new connections, may fade. And you will be left with trying to figure out, where do we go from here? Richard Saul Wurman, who founded the TED conferences, so you can either thank him or be mad at him, said if you see connections between things, your choices will be less threatening. We continue to have diversive curiosity in order to reduce threats and increase our ability to navigate through the changing world. As long as there is change, particularly unpredictable change, there is a need for diversive curiosity that keeps the epistemic curiosity fresh and competitive. What are we going to call these future occupations if the boundaries are rethought because of profound new ideas and connections? Look at the dots for 2x4s and ERs and consider how they might be more strongly connected to one or the other. Both traditional industries of architecture and medicine have reason to claim primacy, but so will many other industries connected in ways you're not yet understanding, perhaps until it's too late. For example, if you bring molecular structure into the conversation, you're also in the realm traditionally identified not just with architecture or medicine, but engineering, chemistry, agriculture, manufacturing, and the list goes on. When you think about 3D printing, and you're able to print buildings or substantial parts of buildings, which industry is that really in? Take that notion into the 2030s, and if nanotech continues on its current course, which is likely, will we be able to design and grow buildings? Stay tuned and stay curious about those technologies because, believe it or not, they're very, very curious about you. And who really cares what the traditional boundaries of an occupation are if there's new and interesting work to be done? The boundaries may be just there to bind you to an old and outdated way of thinking that serves just some more than others. Occupational boundaries may be necessary, but they are artificial, and by necessity or insurgency, they will change with the times. Max Levchin, Peter Thiel, Luke Nosek, Ken Howry, Yu Pan, and Russell Simmons. What do those 6 names have in common? they invented PayPal. But a far more interesting question is, what do 4 of the 6 have in common while they were in their high school years? They made bombs. These were not bombs to harm people. These were bombs, what's the term? These were bombs made to blow fecal matter up. They made bombs, and now they're billionaires. And the key question for this slide is, what does your industry do with its delinquents? How many pathways into the future can you see? Are you following along on the well-worn paths? Are they just convenient, mature industry pathways? Or are they pathways that might change everything familiar? What is it about the thinking of those 6 guys that made such unexpected leaps? Yet if they were in high school today, they would be so heavily medicated, they would invent nothing. What price are we willing to pay as individuals and as a society for leaps of innovation? How much of the future is actually created after someone says, "Here, hold my beer and watch this"? Granted, a lot of people die horrible deaths following those words, but some of them live and go on to found PayPal or, say, an industry like Tesla. Meanwhile, the old order of things sometimes doubles down in order to keep the old order of things. I think they made a movie about this called The Empire Strikes Back. And as George Lucas and others will tell you, this is not a new story. It is always a very old story, and you would do well to study history so as to not keep repeating the same mistakes every time. The Pandora effect, quite simply, is that not only is it in our nature to be curious, it is in our nature to be curious even if it gets us into trouble. We want to reduce uncertainty, so we are driven to explore and learn, often ignoring both short-term and long-term costs. Curiosity changes us. After we learn something, we are not the same person anymore. When you gather all these dots and continue to collect and connect them, you become a different person. A lot of people are uncomfortable with such change because deeper down, too many of us believe that change is what other people need to do. I'm fine, you're the problem. But the problem really is that only those committed to ignorance believe that change is for others, not themselves. Again, quoting Zena Hitz, she said, "To learn, to be curious, is to take on an awesome responsibility of allowing oneself to be changed, because it might not be for the better." But as Pandora found out, there is always hope. And hope's great strength is in its contradiction. Hope reveals its great strength when things are hopeless. We fight the hopeless battles and still hope to win. It is one of the most powerful forces in the universe. Ask anyone who has ever overcome great adversity. They had and they needed hope. Chapter 2, Threats to Your Connections. The most obvious threat to your connectivity is automation. The management consultant Peter Drucker had said, "If you can measure it, you can manage it." The modern translation of that is, if you can measure it, you can automate it. What % of your work can be measured? How much of it is immeasurable? My sense is that you'd be lucky if the measurable aspects are not higher than 80%. 80% of what you do will be better done by machines. And this is not just about architects. This is virtually every occupation out there. AI has gotten incredibly aggressive in claiming the skills and tasks that we thought were going to be reserved for humans. They are not. The key challenge: how do you identify and, very importantly, how do you articulate the value add of that 20%? How do you explain it to the marketplace that is either distracted into their devices or, when they do look up, they've already grown bored with all the cantilevered multi-shaded boxes that now pass for early 21st century architecture? There are a few opportunities with articulating the 20%. Number one, Kevin Kelly, founding editor of Wired magazine, said, "It is not a race against the machine. It is, and it always has been, a race with the machine. We are Homo faber. We are tool makers and thereby tool users. And when you have new tools, you have to have new rules. Otherwise, the tools are going to set the rules. We have to have a much better sense of when to let the tool be an extension of ourselves and when to put the tools behind us and be there right in front, face to face with the community, the materials, and the clients, and each other. Number 2, with AI and big data, we've gotten much better at assessing both individual skills as well as skill gaps. We can measure our abilities or lack thereof. And as collaboration is such a handy buzzword, let's actually get better at big picture collaboration by using AI to help us weave our individual skills together with the tools and with the team. Number 3, David Epstein, author of Range, said, "The bigger the picture, the more unique potential for human contribution. Our greatest strength is the exact opposite of narrow specialization. It is in the ability to integrate." So, addressing the question that's on the slide, can you automate architects? And the answer is no, not the good ones. But what will define a good architect when the apps have taken over most of your measurable technical skills? If you have not paid enough attention to the vagaries of automation, wait, let me rephrase that. Because you have not paid enough attention to the vagaries of automation, your future is uncertain. For non-architects, the immeasurable aspects of architecture have always been the most important, and therefore they cannot be defined just by architects. Architecture will become irrelevant to too many people if it encourages no curiosity, no sense of whimsy, awe, pride, or delight. With too many buildings, there is nothing that draws the eye to explore or even to rest upon. I recall watching the protests last summer as they marched down Pennsylvania Avenue, past these forgettable federal and corporate office buildings, and thought, no wonder they're revolting. If architecture is the most public of all arts, there should be something expressed other than what is called post-audience art. Melissa Pierce, a Chicago filmmaker, perhaps said it best. "So many buildings look cold and unromantic, boxy without curves. I'm starting to believe the architects had mothers who never loved them." A few years later, Cameron Sinclair, one of the co-founders of Architecture for Humanity, said at the 2013 AIA convention, "The most sustainable building is a building that is loved." How do we connect the dots of love to our work and to our buildings? Do you care? Do you care about that? You cannot connect such things without a broader context. What else does this mean? What other dots do I need to connect with to better understand that? Did your education prepare you to talk about the beauty and the depth of the immeasurable while you were learning to use computers that have increasingly automated the process of the measurable? Do your conversations entertain thoughts of how to express something not just for the bottom line, but for the horizon? Several years ago, I was asked to participate in a crit at the University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee School of Architecture for a project called Skycar City. This was a project between an architectural firm and the university, and it was to design a city in the future in which we didn't have cars, and how much we could change people's lives, of course, for the better, by eliminating roads, eliminating cars, and dramatically and completely transforming the lives of these people in a major city. And when it was my turn in the crit to provide critique, my first question was, how many of you have ever had any philosophy or theology? And the response was laughter. And kind of the weird thing was that it was sort of mostly deep-throated laughter, as in it was the faculty laughing. But my question to those students very much had to do with the idea of how do you know that your efforts to do good will not cause greater harm in the future? What if your grand, well-educated solutions in the end only served you and the people who think like you, or, as mentioned earlier, just the bottom line? Philosophy and its sibling theology do not so much provide answers as they help us to ask and explore deep questions. They are tools for connecting ideas. They can give us frameworks for thinking. They invite us to not have to reinvent everything, because no matter what you have thought or felt, someone before you has almost certainly done the same. You can, as they say, stand upon the shoulders of giants and see farther. And in case you bristle at the suggestion of theology, I want to say that you can be a devout agnostic, but theologians can help you think about such deep and perhaps even troubling questions of who are we? Why are we here? What does it mean to be human? What is our obligation to the other, even or especially if we've never even met them? What is our obligation to those not yet born or not even yet imagined? Asking such questions within guided conversations does mean that we can still dream big and we can take big risks. But philosophy and theology can help you to consider that we should not forget who is small and who will take the brunt of when we make no small plans. The science fiction writer William Gibson said, "The future is already here. It's just not evenly distributed." Well, thank heavens for that. A lot of ambitious people who have made predictions and planned for the future achieved a lot of that future, and a lot of it now sucks. They didn't have to worry about the long-term implications because they just worried about their bottom line and their reputation. In their isolation, they thought they were saving the future, but in fact they were messing with it without considering broader long-term implications. They were doing it without any sense of humility. Robert Moses, dismissing Jane Jacobs and her rallying a group of local residents to resist one of his schemes, was full of steam when he said that nobody is against this, nobody but a bunch of mothers. I suspect that if the future were a bit better distributed, mothers would have more to say about such grand plans. There might be more respect for a lot of little plans. In 2010, I heard Governor Brad Little of Idaho say that one of the great things about America is that here, small ideas are as important as big ideas. It might not yet quite be the truth for all, but it is what we wish were true, and we should make more plans to make it come true more often. Some comfort with the thoughts and the thinking within philosophy and theology can help make that happen. A friend of mine who teaches at the Milwaukee Institute of Art and Design found that his students were terribly afraid to fail because for the entirety of their lives, they had never been able to hide their mistakes. Social media provides examples every day that they too can be haunted and canceled for their sins, no matter when they might have been committed, or even if it wasn't a sin when they did it. The effect on the design class was there were few practical creative connections. They were afraid to trust and afraid to try. So he set up an assignment which everyone got an F, non-negotiable. Of course, if everyone got an F, it didn't really change anybody's grade, but at first there were cries it was wrong and unfair, even complaints to the dean and the president. But as he showed them that if it was okay to fail, they were also free to try something new. And that's when the fun started and the ideas started flowing. He said some of the best projects in the class came out of the F assignments. He also said that once they got a better understanding of the freedom to fail, they want to know if they could fail again. I think the point was also for them to learn to fail small and soon rather than too big and too late. The freedom to fail is vastly more important than the freedom to succeed. In many societies, you can succeed, but only within exact limitations. If you follow a predetermined path, the future is predictable, but mostly it's safe what's already here. Safe for the people who are already successful within those narrow confines. Sure, we do want a lot of the future to be predictable, but also recall that another word for predictable is boring. The freedom to try new things, to connect what has not yet been considered connectable, will result in a lot of failure. It also means the future is not limited to the past. It can be successful by being better, and we have the freedom to imagine what has never been imagined before. A free society is one that finds ways to forgive and even to forget. It's why so many people love the idea of the horizon. We can go over it and reinvent ourselves, try again and again, and when necessary, start anew. Social media that never forgets and never forgives is taking away that freedom from us all. Many immigrants are surprised that in America, we can take things back to the store. It's shocking to them that mistakes are not final. It's one of the reasons so many people want to come here, because the freedom to make mistakes and try again is so important to life, so important to a species that cannot help but make mistakes. Chapter 3, Opportunities for Connecting. When I was on the AIA National Board as a public director, I had also gotten to keynote several of the AIAS New Year's Eve forums and had become sort of an unofficial ambassador between the board and AIAS. In the midst of this, as many of you will remember in 2012, there was a slump in the profession, and such esteemed publications as The Daily Beast said that architecture was one of the worst college majors you could go into. And of course, the journalists took glee in this. The students in the profession did not. Anyway, I decided to survey AIS members and got several hundred responses to the question, if you don't become an architect, what else might you do? I then took their answers and pasted them into Wordle.net, which makes word clouds. The more a word was used in their collected answers, the bigger that word is in the cloud. Do any of those words kind of jump out at you? I think the students get the design is at the center. No matter what happens to the career, as explained by the pundits, journalists, or whomever, they will be designers. And design has always transcended the boundaries of architecture. Design is not just at the center of your profession, it's now at the center of the world. Everything can be connected to design, and more importantly, connected through design. That is a threat to the profession if you use that fact to tell others and yourself that you're cool. It presents opportunities if you use it to tell the world why and how design is cool. Design, not designers, is at the center. Connect your curiosity to that and through that. Every time people are told to be creative thinkers, they are inevitably told also to think outside the box. Don't. Stop it. It's bad advice. Because most of the time, when people are thinking outside the box, they're just wandering around lost in thought. The point really should be is to think into other boxes, connecting your thinking across boundaries. And that's why I'd like you to meet Dr. Mindy Thompson-Fullilove, MD. She and I became friends because we were both public directors on the AIA board. Her fascinating contribution to the field of architecture is that she's a great model for thinking into other boxes. Similar in ways to the works of Jane Jacobs, but with lots of rigorous epistemic and diversive research, she explains root shock, comparing what happens to plants when ripped from their beds to what happens to so many plans and lives of the moms and dads and families displaced by so-called urban renewal. Connecting that box with medicine, her research followed the spread of disease and mortality to those from neighborhoods ripped apart. No matter plants or humans, you cut away our roots and we wither and often die too soon. In her new book, Main Street, How a City's Heart Connects Us All, she looks at the decline of local main streets and gives solid research on the re-strengthening of the vital centers of our towns and cities. Most impressive is her enduring sense of hope, because she has seen so much pain caused by ignorant and arrogant destruction, and it must seem to her, and to many of us, as a hopeless battle. But of course, she says hopeful things like, The web of main streets is deeper than the World Wide Web. Main streets are as old and as vital as civilization itself. She says main streets help us name and solve our problems. It's not a rejection of the World Wide Web. Her work seeks to have that tool be more appropriately connected to the brick and mortar and mortals who are part of Main Street communities. The thing about Main Streets is that when we are on our own Main Street, we are actually and actively thinking into other boxes in real life and real time. And we are sharing that vitality with our communities. The architect Juhani Pallasmaa, in his book The Thinking Hand, tells us how our brains are not just stuck up inside our heads, but include our hands. And that design suffers because we have too often reduced the brain's involvement in design to just fingertips, and too often just one fingertip. He said that the use of the computer has broken the sensual and tactile connection between imagination and the object of design. I think the future will be won or lost based on whether the professional class is willing to ever again get dirt under their fingernails and ink on their fingertips. In the 1980s and 90s, we got rid of almost all the shop classes in high school because of A, growing concern about liability, and B, everyone knew that the future was for knowledge workers. Everyone was going to go to college, or they were losers. But because of automation, the average so-called knowledge worker today, stuck in a cubicle farm, tethered to screens, spends less time problem solving and uses less critical thinking skills than the average mechanic. Speaking of screens, I also want to make a plea for paper books and the keeping of paper journals. Devices with screens help us spread ideas, but there's some discouraging research that says they do not help us enough to understand ideas. A study by Columbia University and the French National Institute found that 59% of articles that are shared online are not read before they are spread. We read the headline or just far enough into the first paragraph to agree or disagree, and then we forward it on to others. We have reduced much of our grasp of internet information to the level of memes. Screens are just surfaces, but books have what can be called a sensuality to them. From the weight of the book to the texture of the paper, the brain in our hands also learns from books. Just even the fact the words have a permanent placement on the page, in a stack of pages, fixes those words into a location that our brain registers. And when reading, read with a pen in your hand. In 2014, Tim Parks wrote an article for the New York Review of Books entitled "A Weapon for Readers." The article is nicely summarized this way. He said, "There is something predatory, cruel even, about a pen suspended over a text. Like a hawk over a field, it is on the lookout for something vulnerable. The mere fact of holding the pen poised for action changes our attitude to the text. We are no longer passive consumers of a monologue, but active participants in a dialogue. It means for you that a book is not really finished. You do not learn enough from a book until you have actively engaged with the author by underlining and annotating with pen in hand." Apologetics and paradox. These are a lot more simple than you might at first glance think. It is that you must learn to better defend what it is you believe. The term apologetics, which the dictionary defines as reasoned arguments in defense of something, is critical in your defense of the immeasurable 20%. If you believe in the importance of design and architecture, but can't explain it to a non-architect, then you really don't understand design and architecture. While speaking at a university down in the Southwest, it will remain nameless, I also was asked to participate in a crit. The student did an okay job, but he was vague, hadn't practiced, the sound on his film was way too loud, he hadn't tested the tech because the video kept stuttering and pausing, and in a brand new building, the auditorium lights were either all on or all off. I praised some of the aspects of his project, but then looking around the room, I said, I'm one of the oldest people in the room. I might be the guy with the checkbook. And with all of those problems that interfered with my understanding your message, I gently asked him, if you pissed me off, why would I write a check to you? And at that point, one of the professors stood up, turned to me, and said, "We teach design, not sales." Let me translate that for you. We don't really teach design here. We teach post-audience architecture. And who exactly let you in the building? I have been shocked at how little attention has been given to presentation skills at schools and even at national AIA events. What I wanted to see at convention is a bit less obsession with HSW and a bit more emphasis on presentation, listening, essay writing, letters to the editor, poetry, videography, debate, conversations about beauty, even drawing, for crying out loud. It's the one skill you have that I'm jealous of, and it happens to be the skill many of you are giving away to machines. It's one of your best tools for communicating that can express something that screens and printouts cannot. It is an expression of who you are. One of the best ways to understand something is to study the paradoxes about it and know how and why they are connected. It is a natural arena for architects. Form and function, art and science, light and shadow, strength and beauty. The list goes on. To be a good architect, you need to have a sense of how these paradoxical things play with each other, how they balance, how they struggle with each other, and how to explain any of that to those who don't yet understand the interplay of paradox. Junichiro Tanizaki, a Japanese novelist, wrote in praise of shadows back in the 1930s, and the most brilliant line in the essay is that were it not for shadows, there would be no beauty. That is a beautiful description of paradox. Study paradox and use it to help your clients and community understand the future value of what it is that you do, the human architect can do. Apologetics and paradox are essential to knowing how to offer the immeasurable 20% to the marketplace and to the world. The pandemic has broken too many of us. But because we are often still separate, we don't yet see it. But you can certainly feel it. It feels like we are falling apart and the center will not hold. We are not meant to be alone. We are meant to take risks. We need to come back together to share time and stories and celebrate who we are and want to become. And in the spirit of the Japanese art of kintsugi, make repairs to ourselves and the Institute, repairs that often look like spider webs, adding strength, interest, and beauty to who we are because of the repairs. In kintsugi, what had been broken is not hidden, but even perhaps celebrated because we have brought an imperfect thing back together and restored it to still be a part of the future. We forgive ourselves, we forgive others, and we repair the breach. These last 4 dots will help you make the repairs. Number 1, go out for lunch or dinner. Go with friends and or coworkers. Abandon your offices. Turn away from your screens. We need to recognize that it is way too easy to make work the center of our lives, to the point where too many of us do not have much more than just work. Like our devices, workplaces are being designed in such a way that you do not need to leave or ever turn away. In a word, we are working to make work just as addictive as our screens. Give your minds a break. Give your heart a lift. When you break bread, you break barriers. Number 2, spice. Bring it, cook with it, play with it. Add a touch of it to your personality. Be an individual in the middle of a history and a future. Spices are about being in the moment, but bringing with you all of your history and future, sharing it with others in the here and now. We think too little of the momentary and too much of plans and trends. One of the best ingredients of your future will be the moments you look back upon that are remembered and shared. Number 3, and the paradox of the momentary is the eternal. What doesn't change is more important than the next change. In times of tumultuous change, the first task is not to predict what's next. It's to seek what doesn't change, what shouldn't change, and what should be rediscovered and remembered. That is the essence of how you create renaissance. To re-find yourself between the momentary and the eternal, and to move forward from there. Finally, you need to get drunk. I'm talking about the book Drunk by Edward Stringerland I'd mentioned earlier. It's subtitled How We Sipped, Stumbled, and Danced Our Way to Civilization. It is probably the most entertaining book I've read this year. To be clear, he is clear about the dangers of alcohol. But also, he points out what happens when there's not enough of it. He breaks it down by comparing the god Apollo to the god Dionysus. Apollo is the prefrontal cortex. It's the part of the brain that reasons, measures, and builds. It's part of the brain that gets the job done. It created civilization. But we are not meant to be ruled just by reason and order. Playfulness, especially away from work, must be welcomed back into our lives. The god Dionysus is the fun one. He likes to play. He likes to talk. He likes to party. Dionysus is the one who lets his hair down, lets off some steam, and makes friends. And with enough drink, even forgives and befriends his enemies. He is literally and figuratively the life of the party. Apollo hates him. Apollo wants us to increase the number of HSW credits. Dionysus wants us to learn a bit more poetry, because we need poetic buildings. We will look up once or twice at the completely computer-designed, completely measurable buildings, but only the immeasurable, poetic, enchanted buildings will have us look up and feel alive and want to share that moment with others, because those are the buildings we will love and protect. We need more reasons to love our neighborhoods and our skylines. If we are to love more of our buildings, then we also need romance. We need enchantment. We need to dance with our troubles and our adventures. We can't do it if the prefrontal cortex is always in charge. Dionysus needs to be invited back into the profession. Apollo needs a timeout. I am not saying that members of the AIA must get a little drunk once in a while, but breaking bread and camaraderie are essential to the health of a healthy organization. All the while, we consciously keep each other in check to not overdo it. I am saying the institution, the AIA, needs to get drunk. It needs to be more playful, less concerned with credits, and more concerned that its members have well-rounded lives away from their screens. It needs to be at least 20% Dionysus. It needs to show its members and the world that it's just as concerned about the immeasurable 20% as it is about the all-too measurable 80%. Cheers.